the subscription billing modules. Parts 1, 2, 3, and 4 have been recorded, and you can find the recordings on the Tech Talk Dynamics community page. Let's quickly go through the agenda. So first, we are going to go through the configuration and entity mapping between revenue recognition and subscription billing, then share a few examples of various scenarios, and move into product demos. We will finish with the roadmap and the Q&A session. As we are deprecating revenue recognition module and moving to subscription billing, one of the key concepts to assure seamless move is to have clarity of the mappings for configuration and data entities between these modules. In this table on the screen, you can see the configuration in revenue recognition and its equivalent in subscription billing module. Let's go through the table together. So recognition basis would be equal to deferral template with period frequency, and we have option to specify monthly occurrences as well as fiscal periods here. However, option to have monthly by days, which is specified in revenue recognition, is controlled by a parameter equal amounts per period in subscription billing parameters. This parameter determines if the prorate amount is calculated by the number of days in a month or not. Occurrences and period length both specify the frequency, and in revenue recognition, there were two additional parameters, automatic hold and automatic contract terms. Automatic hold option allowed customers to put all revenue schedule lines onto hold when the invoice is posted. In subscription billing, deferral schedules can be put on hold individually, but we do not have an option to create them in an all hold state in advance. Automatic contract terms configuration control the start and end days based on the requested ship date, and in subscription billing, a deferral template definition along with parameter called default deferral start date controls the deferral start and end dates. Now, if we delve into more details and look at the scenario specifically for default deferral start date, in revenue recognition convention, this is now represented by the same default deferral start date parameter. So you can see on the left side, the configuration on the revenue recognition convention, and in subscription billing, revenue expense deferrals, default deferral start date. Out of all of these configurations, you should check the last one specifically, end of month period, which in subscription billing now requires override deferral start and end date on the transaction. This is how these parameters look on the forms. And in revenue schedule, we have a table to define recognition convention, as you see on the top screen, this on the screen on the top. And this is controlled in revenue and expense deferral parameter to subscription billing. Now, let's move forward and check how we are mapping entities between these modules. Specifically, we are going to focus on subscription billing deferral schedule table entity, which would be probably the most important in terms of the process of moving schedules between revenue recognition and subscription billing. Now, for sub-bill deferral schedule table entity, we have the following fields to consider when importing the data. Deferral schedule number, this is the unique number or copy of the sales order number, which was the case in revenue recognition module. And we should just know that each deferral schedule will need a unique schedule number and item number combination. Schedule type, this could be straight line on an end base, and we discussed different schedule types in our previous Tech Talks. Description, and then we move into the deferral account, which would be equal to deferred the revenue account in RevRec deferred line entity in revenue recognition module. Recognition type, which would be either credit for the revenue and debit for consumption, and date, which is equal to date of invoice in RevRec deferred line entity. Finally, we have start date and end date, and this would determine the start and end dates for deferral schedule in subscription billing. Well, these are just the configurations and parameters and entity mapping. However, let's get into the examples, and we have 4 in total. So example number 1 would be 1 year deferral with equal amounts per month starting on the day of the invoice. This is how this configuration looked in revenue recognition. We have revenue schedule in revenue recognition with occurrences equal 12, recognition basis equal monthly, recognition convention equal actual start date, and sales order amount. In this example, 1,500. Revenue recognition scheduled configuration you see on the screen, and at the end of the day, you will get this result, which we would have the revenue recognition schedule with monthly recognition of $124.95, with exception being the final period for 125.55. Now, the same configuration in subscription billing and revenue expense deferral would be as follows. We would have a deferral template with period frequency monthly, line setup with the type recognized, and period length equal 12. We also mentioned before the equal amounts per period parameter, which determines if schedule is based on the days of the month or not, the days in the month or not. And in this scenario, the parameter is enabled, meaning that each period will have an equal amount calculated. You can see this parameter here on the screen and all the configurations as well. Now, this is how this schedule would look like. The deferral schedule would have the equal amounts for every month, and it would be $125 as an amount. Now, let's move forward with example number 2. And example number 2 is 1 year deferral with amounts based on number of days per month, starting on the day of the invoice. And in the revenue recognition schedule, this actually has been specified as the occurrences equal 12, recognition basis equal monthly by days, recognition convention equal actual start date, and sales order amount as 1,500. The revenue recognition schedule configuration you can see there, and the only difference between the example number 1 and 2 are actually recognition basis right here. Now, this would actually this would show in revenue recognition schedule as monthly recognition based on number of days per month. And we see, for example, 115.07 in February, 127.4 in March, and so on and so forth. The same configuration as subscription billing revenue and expense deferrals would actually be the same as we discussed before, except that one carrier on the equal amounts per period parameter, which in this case would be null. This allows us to prorate, to have a prorate by date. And now we have the configuration of the deferral schedule showing monthly recognition based on the number of days per month. And we see 115.07 in February and 123.29 for 30 days month and 127.4 for 31 days months. Now I'm going to give a word to Brian to cover the remaining examples.
Thanks, Milda. So for our third example, we'll look at a scenario where we have a 1-year deferral with the amounts per occurrence starting on the invoice date. So in the revenue recognition standpoint or setup, we'd set this up as a recognition basis of occurrences, with those occurrences being 12, and our convention would be actual start date. So in this case, we'll start with our same sales order of $1,500. So if you look at the revenue schedule that gets produced from this particular setup, we'll end up with what we see here, which would be a total recognition or recognition amount of $125 per month as we go through the schedule. To set up the same scenario in subscription billing, so in the revenue and expense deferrals module, the difference here would be we'd use a period frequency of monthly in our deferral template, and then you'll see in our lines we have a type of recognized and a length of 12, so that'd be 12 equal periods there. And that's based on that parameter that Milda had talked about as well, so equal amounts per period. Now, one thing I'll talk about with that parameter too here real quick is that it's a parameter. As you set up your deferral on each transaction, you can have a mix of equal amounts per period on and off on a transaction. So if I had 2 sales order lines, one could be equal amounts per period and the other one could be not equal amounts per period. So it's all based on that setup. This is just a default option that goes to that transaction deferral screen. So here, if we look at our deferral schedule that gets created here, we'll see that we get $125 per month, just like we did in the revenue recognition scenario. Moving to example 4, this one is based on monthly amounts, but it's based on fiscal periods rather than any kind of monthly calendar or anything of that nature. And this one's going to start on the date of the invoice as well. So here on the RevRec side, we had 12 occurrences with our recognition basis of fiscal period by days, and then our convention being our actual start date. So if we take a look at this scenario, what we see in RevRec is we'll see different amounts here for each of the months. So January has one amount, February has a different amount. And if you look closely at the numbers, you'll actually see that there was a bug on this particular scenario where October ended up with a far larger amount than it should have, essentially almost 2 months worth. So that's that scenario based on the fiscal period. So to set this up on the subscription billing side of things in revenue and expense deferrals, what we do is we'd pick a period frequency like you see in the deferral templates form there of fiscal periods. And then now we have the type of recognized again, and then our length of the number of periods. So we want 12 fiscal periods in this case. In this case, we didn't mark equal amounts per period, so we don't want that to be equal each period. We want it to be prorated by day. So our results will be based on that particular amount. So when we see the results here on the next slide, we'll see that we vary by month as far as the number of days in each month because that parameter was off, but we're basing this on the fiscal period setup. So now we're going to move into our demos. So a couple of notes. First and foremost, it's a recorded demo, so please make sure that you have your speaker volume up loud to make sure that you're able to hear the recording. And then I also want to make a couple of other caveats too. So this is a way to move from revenue recognition to subscription billing. It may not work for everybody. There's other options, which include your typical data migration processes that exist today, or there are also options in AppSource that are available from ISVs. So those would be available at a fee. They're not necessarily a free thing that you can go pick up. What we're going to describe here is based on using entities to move data across. So with those caveats, I just want to make sure that we had those covered, and we'll get into the demo.
So for our example today, we're going to start with a sales order that I have created has revenue recognition and a revenue schedule assigned to it. It will be this sales order here, 000867. We'll pull that particular sales order up. We can see here we have S0001. It's our line item. The price $1,500, and that has a revenue schedule of 12 months attached to it. If we look a little bit further, we can see that this particular sales order is invoiced, and we have a revenue recognition schedule that's been created. Looking at that revenue schedule, we see that we have 12 monthly periods of revenue recognition happening here, going from January through December. You also see that in this case, we processed the first 6 periods of revenue recognition, so up through June 30th. So not only do we need to get this data over to revenue and expense deferrals, we also need to mark those first 6 periods as recognized, because we recognize them here in revenue recognition. So to start this process, what we'll need to do is export this data using the deferred line revenue recognition entity. So it's RevRec deferred line entity. We'll take a look at that real quick here. So if we go to DMF, we can take a look at the particular configuration of that export. So here we'll see I have an export here for deferred line. We'll open up that project. And in here, we didn't do anything special as far as restricting any fields out. We left the core mappings. The important pieces here are what we're going to need when we go to revenue schedule. And those are going to be the following fields. It's going to be the fields in the deferral, sub-bill deferral table will be the deferral schedule number, schedule type, transaction type, description, deferral account, the recognition type, the dates, start and end dates as well. So the invoice date. And then one quick note, when you're going through this particular process, one of the things you'll need to note is what you have set in general ledger for the dimension value for integrating applications. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that up here real quick. So in this case, we need to be aware of what this particular format is. So in my case here, it's main account, business unit, cost center, department. So when I bring this into a revenue recognition of revenue and expense deferral schedule, I need to make sure that I know what that format is, especially because I don't want those dimensions to be filled in. Even if they're not filled in, we'll need to have the dashes in there, and I'll show that in our particular example here. So now that we've got exported our entity here, we can take a look at what we get from the deferred line entity. So we're going to get a line for each revenue recognition schedule line, and you'll see the ones that are recognized will have a journal assigned to them. Our deferral, in that case, our revenue schedule is for $1,500. It's our core amount or a base amount that we're recognizing over that 12 months. So we need to take this data and then roll it into what we'll use in subscription billing, which would be called the subscription billing deferral table. That's some bill deferral schedule table entity. So I've gone ahead and I've done some of that work already. And in this case, we're going to bring in the header detail. So we're going to bring in the detail lines. So we want to bring in 1,500. This is going to explode out into lines. Now, if you wanted to, you could bring this over as a line per revenue schedule line. Completely up to you how you want to do it. But in this case, this will create a deferral schedule and then a deferral schedule with 12 lines. So that's what we'll see as our resulting case. In my case, I'm not going to provide the deferral schedule number. We'll look at that when we go into the import. I'm going to let my number sequence dictate what that number is. Then we'll see it here. I've got the customer account. I've got my deferral account number. So this is my deferred revenue account here, 250600. And we'll see that I have the 3 dashes here that matches that financial integration AVS, dimensions display value. So that was the format we just looked at in Dynamics 365 Finance. My deferral amount, which was 1,500. And then we have a description. So here I fill that in with deferral for SO 867. Our end dates. Do I want equal values per period? So do I want this to be equal values per period, or do I want this to be a per diem where months with less days have less value for the deferral, or do I want them to be equal per each month? So in my case, I want them equal. So I said yes here. And then we have our recognition account number. So this is going to be where our revenue account would lie here. And then once again, the value for the integrated apps or the number of dimensions to include in that field. If you don't do that, you will get a message when you try to import. So it'll fail to import it, and I'll tell you exactly why that doesn't match there. A recognition type. So in our case, we're recognizing the revenue here. So we want to credit as a recognition type. And then our schedule type, this can be straight line, or it can be event-based schedule. In our case, we're using a straight line schedule here, or start date. So in our case, our invoice was on 1/1. We're using just calendar year to keep things simple. So we match that up. Our transaction type. So here, this will be sales order because that's where our revenue recognition schedule is attached to. And then our invoice date or trans date. So this is our invoice date. So 1/1/2023. And that's what we have there. So now I'm going to jump back into the F&O application here, and we'll take a look at our particular import for our action that we want to bring up. So once again, we're back in DOF. And then in this case, we want to look at our import project for subscription billing deferral table. So in my case, I used a package file. And then what I did is I went and modified the map, as I mentioned, the description that I gave for the deferral schedule number here. I marked that as auto-generated. So I'm going to take it from the number sequence so I don't have to provide the deferral schedule number and split numbering that I have for that. And then what we'll do is we'll import this particular data, and then we'll take a look at that particular data after it's been completed for import. Right, our data is imported here. So we have our number of lines that have been created. So we can see that we're successful here. Now we're going to take a look at our deferral schedule that was created. So now we're going to, instead of looking on the sales order for our revenue schedule, we're going to the subscription billing menu items, and we're going to look at all deferral schedules under revenue and excess deferrals and then deferral schedules. In our case, our deferral schedule is this one here, USMF, and the one ending in 23. We'll take a look at this particular deferral schedule. So here we can see some of the details that we saw. We can see that our amount here is 1,500, which matches what we had when we did our imported and what we had from revenue recognition. We see our transaction type as sales order. We see our customer account number. We see our accounts that we had specified in the file, a recognition type of credit. And then if we scroll down, we can see our lines. So spanning our time frame there as far as what we had for our deferral. So we can see all the way from January 1st through December 31st. Now you'll notice in this case, none of these are recognized. But in our case, when we started, we had a revenue schedule and revenue recognition that was recognized through June 30th. So now we need to mark this particular schedule as recognized for those first 6 periods. Keybilling has a feature called stubbing, which will allow us to mark these as recognized without having to post anything. Since we did recognize that revenue previously, it was recorded in the journal and posted. We don't want to necessarily change these schedules and post this, but we want to mark this up to date so that when we get to July 31st and do our month end and recognize our revenue, we'll be able to start there, incorrectly post revenue from these bolded lines that are part of the schedule. Now, a couple of things I want to call out too before we go do our stubbing is, for instance, maybe we made a mistake when we imported the schedule. There's a few different things you can do to the schedule to manipulate the amounts or some of the information in the particular schedule. Now, if it's an important schedule, you also have the ability to delete the schedule. A schedule created from a transaction doesn't have that ability. So, for instance, if you import one, it's incorrect, you can delete it, re-import, fix it. Other options are, for instance, maybe the schedule is not quite right. So you didn't match up with what you wanted as far as the details. So maybe you included equal amounts per period and you didn't want to do that particular setting. You can use the modify schedule function here, and then you can change that setting and then click OK, and then I will change that. And then you'll see your values be based on the number of days in each month. I'm not going to change mine here, but just an example of some of the things you could change. For instance, we can consolidate prior period, we change the start and date of the deferral, or we could switch to use a template instead. So some of the options there as far as modify schedule. Now, maybe I incorrectly put the accounting here. Maybe it didn't match up with exactly what I wanted. I could also use the modify account function to fix that particular piece. Now, In this case, I will call out that since it's importing, you may rather delete and then re-import, because this is going to create a channel that maybe you don't want to necessarily have post, because we did post these particular transactions and brought them in. So there's a couple of options there. So now we're going to go stub our periods from January through June. So to do that, we're going to use a periodic function, and it's called recognition process. So this is the same function that we use to do the recognition of the revenue each month. But in our case, we want to stub these particular transactions. So we want to stub through 6/30, because this is what we've recognized already in our schedules in revenue recognition. So when I click View Preview here, I'm going to see some lines here that will come in as far as that particular information of what to stub. In this case, I'm only interested in the one schedule. I wanted 23. I don't want schedule USMF 001. So I'm going to go back here and we're going to filter our records here to make sure that we only have the schedules that make sense to do this particular stubbing. In our case, we'll filter down to that particular record. We are a preview, and then we can make sure that we have 6 records like we expect. And then if we wanted to, we can take a look at totals even here to see, so we can cross-check 750, that matches what we'd expect. Then we're going to hit process. Then we're going to see a message that said schedule lines processed. So it says 6. So if we go back to our deferral schedule, look at our lines here, now we're going to see that we have a value for stub on the first 6 records. The last 6 don't have that. When we go to recognize a revenue the next time for this schedule, it's going to pick it up as a starting point of 7.1. So this is how we can bring those in-process transactions into the revenue expense deferrals module. Now, this doesn't have to be only for scenarios where you're moving from RevRec to subscription billing. For instance, you might be moving from any system that's doing your revenue recognition and want to bring that in-flight data in. You can do that using this function and then stub those records, mark those in-flight transactions. For instance, we know people aren't just starting with revenue recognition from day one. Typically, they have a scenario or a situation where they've been using something in the past and they need to move to a new solution. So we can use that stub feature to do that. Now, if we made a mistake when we did the stubbing, in that recognition processing window, there's also an option to reverse a stub. So this would let you remove a stub if, for instance, maybe you stubbed the wrong periods, or maybe you went a little bit further than you thought you should have went. Maybe you were through May 31st and you went all the way through June 30th. Well, you can do a reverse stub. You can reverse out some of those stubs as well. So those are some of the options as far as working with that schedule so that it's at the same point in time that it was when it was a revenue schedule. So you can get that deferral schedule in the same state. So that's an example of how we can take that data from revenue recognition and revenue schedules and move it to a deferral schedule in subscription billing revenue expense deferrals module.
All right, that was our first demo. So in that case, we used entities to move from revenue recognition to subscription billing, so the revenue and expense deferrals module. This next video is going to be a shorter video. We're going to talk about a challenge that's faced by importing those deferral schedules. So if you import a deferral schedule, we have a unique challenge with the entity because of some of the foreign keys with it. So we have a function that we built or a form that we built that make that link between the original sales order and the deferral schedule. So where this would come in handy is if you have scenarios where you need to do a credit note or a return on that existing sales order where you imported the deferral schedule. So we'll take a look at this demo and see how this can help. In this recording, we're going to take a look at how to link an imported deferral schedule to a sales order that should have been the source of that deferral schedule. So in this case, I have a sales order here, 000885 for item S0001, which had a revenue recognition schedule attached to it. I've imported the deferral schedule, and we can go take a look at that particular deferral schedule here. If we can look at our deferral schedules, we'll see we have our deferral schedule here for our $1,200 for customer account US 009 and item S001. We see that's a revenue type and a distribution type, a credit type and a revenue distribution type. And we see that it was imported, but we don't see the sales order linkage here. So what we can do is we can use a form that we've added called assign revenue recognition document to import deferral schedule to set that linkage. So our example, I'm going to use customer 0 US 0 and our item S001. Filter these values, the list of sales. I can see my deferral schedule that I want to link to. So I'm going to click on this and say yes. And it says successfully assigned. So now I have that linkage created. So we'll go back to our deferral schedule and take a look at this.
So here now we can take a look at our deferral schedule. And now we have this linkage created, which is going to allow me to have the ability to now take that sales order and interact with that sales order. For instance, maybe do a return and work off that sales order and then have that reflected deferral schedule in that case. So we take a look here, we'll be able to see our linked deferral schedule. So now if I do a return on the sales order, I'll be able to do this, and then I can potentially update that deferral schedule from the prior imported deferral schedule. So that's a quick demonstration of how that form can allow you to link the imported deferral schedule to the original sales order.
All right, that's the demos that we had for today. Now we're going to jump into a little bit of some roadmap topics. So we'll go take a look at the roadmap as far as revenue recognition and deprecation are concerned, and a few pieces related to it. So back in April was essentially our soft deprecation of revenue recognition. The module remained in the product. We essentially stopped taking hotfix requests or bug requests for that particular product. So that's kind of started in April. As we kind of move forward, one of the things that we've done is we've separated the product bundle feature or the bundle feature out of revenue recognition. So throughout the summer here, so 10.0.34 and 10.0.35, we've released in private preview a separated feature called product bundle, which is the revenue recognition bundle as a standalone feature. That feature will ship in 10.0.36 as a general available feature. So you'll see that when you move to 36, if you're using product bundles or bundles in revenue recognition, you can move to product bundle. That'll give you that functionality separated from revenue recognition. Also through the summer, we've been working on project integration for subscription billing, specifically around deferrals. So we added the ability to do billing and billing schedules through a project back around 10.0.32. And then as we've gone further, we've been adding the deferral features. So we've added deferral features for a number of project transactions. So they're not just limited to sales order or project sales order. You can also do timesheets, expense reports, expense journals, fee journals, hours journals. You'll see the deferral options on there. So if you want more information on that, the prior tech talk that we just did would have the content around that. As we move forward, so targeting 10.0.38 for this is when we'd have the full deprecation of revenue recognition. So at that point, we'd be having the menu items or the UI elements removed from the product. So that would be when you'd see that disappear. So that would be something that's planned to GA in January. Originally, this was planned for 36, but given the time frame of what you see here, so for instance, like the GA of the project integration features being 10.0.38, and then the separated product bundle being 10.0.36, we wanted to give people a couple of releases of overlap there just to make sure that they had the ability to move between those particular versions and the features being toggled on. From a general roadmap perspective for subscription billing, kind of focused on a few things for the next wave. One being enhancements around MIRA, so multiple element revenue allocation. So these are specific to credit notes. So being able to handle the credit note handling and then offsetting that MIRA or the revenue allocation amounts based on that credit note. Then in 10.0.36, you'll see that we added deferrals for stock service items. So if you had a stocked service item previously, you'd only get the revenue schedule. You wouldn't get the cost of goods sold schedule. If you have a stock service item after 10.0.36, you'll get both the revenue schedule and the cost deferral schedule. So that'll be something that only would be there or impact stocked service items. If you have a non-stock service item, it'll continue to act the same. You'll only have the revenue schedule, not the cost side. And of course, a stocked item will give you both the revenue and the cost deferral. Related to the cost deferrals, another thing that we're working on is inventory close and recalculation adjustments for cost of goods sold being written back to the cost deferral. So this is something that we're working on. This will be added in this next wave. So for instance, if you had an item that posts, at the time you post, we create the deferral schedule with the cost deferral schedule. That can get adjusted then by inventory close and recalculation. So watch the what's new. This will be something that will be coming here in the near future.
Thank you very much, Brian. Let's discuss the resources and recommendations that we have. And all of the details that we shared today are going to be available in the recording. But we also have a number of articles in Microsoft Learn and Microsoft Docs pages regarding the subscription billing overview, as well as the whole documentation about revenue recognition migration to subscription billing. In addition to that, our Tech Talk series with subscription billing topic has been recorded and are available in the community page. And all of these links are going to be shared with you as well. Including that, We also have ideas list page in Dynamics Experience Portal, and we highly suggest you to post ideas for the details that you're expecting to see in subscription billing. And we also are very active on the Yammer channel in the sense of subscription billing, as well as the whole ER and AP features. So please check that out as well. I would also highly encourage you to subscribe to the Fast Track magazine, which is the monthly issue where you will be able to see the latest blog post, a LinkedIn post, as well as the events and upcoming features that might be interesting for the whole community, partners and customers included. And now we can jump into the Q&A session. And Brian, I see one question that has been posted for us. Would you like to take that, have a look at this?
Sure. I think I see two. So I'll kind of go back to the beginning one. So one of the first one was, can you please provide a link to the community site that has all the videos? Thanks. So in the slide that Elda just covered with the additional resources, I believe it's the third link that was on that page. Or if you go to community.dynamics.com, you want to look for the blogs. And under that blogs section, you want to look for Microsoft Dynamics 365 Fast Track Tech Talks. That'll get you where you want to go. There should be a subfolder there for subscription billing, depending on if you're looking for the subscription billing ones or just others in general. So there's some options there. I see.
Sorry.
Pasted the link. Yeah, Vilda posted the link right below the question. Perfect.
Yeah, you can see all the links that I shared in the slide here at the end answer.
Okay. So if anybody else is looking for that, if you look in the Q&A section, in the comment to that question, all the links are underneath that as an answer. Another question that's out there is, can the dates in a deferral schedule be manually edited? So when we create a deferral schedule, it'll be based on what the information in the deferral our transaction deferral window would be. So there are override options where you can override the start date, but those are going to be dependent on whether or not you're allowing the ability to have the deferral not align with the billing. So there's a parameter in the recurring contract billing, and that parameter is called align deferral to billing. If you have that on, then you won't have the ability to override those dates at the time. So just keep that in mind. So you can always edit the dates when you go to modify schedule, but you're going to be editing them within the framework of what you have for the dates. So if you're straight line, you'll still need to have a template, or you'll need to find a start and end date. If you're using an event-based template, then a little more flexibility. When you go to modify schedule, you can put the specific date in there that you want. So that's a little bit on that one. Probably some good content in the deferrals tech talk around that one. Another question, entities are available before activating the new functionality. So this is a good question. So the entities are there. Even if you don't have subscription billing turned on in feature management, you'll still be able to see that subscription billing deferral table entity before you turn on the feature. So if you wanted to play around with in a sandbox with revenue recognition feature management still on, you could do that, and you could still use the entity as far as the deferral schedule entity is concerned. Now, you wouldn't be able to see the UI element without the feature on, but you can definitely interact with the entity. It says, can I import sales order lines with deferral information in it using DM or data management? The question there is a good question. So if you look at how we did the implementation for revenue recognition, on a sales line, we had the revenue schedule on the sales line. Now we're a related table, so we're a foreign key relationship to the sales order line. So yes, you can, but you'll need to use an additional entity to do so. So in that case, there's a transaction deferral entity that is specific to that transaction deferral setup. So it's something like subscription billing transaction deferral line entity or something of that nature. It should match the form name. So if you right click on that particular form for the deferrals, you'll be able to see that, and it should match up exactly with that form name. It looks like I might have skipped over a question here too. So when setting number of days per month, will the code recognize days in a 445 calendar? So in that case, this question, I wouldn't necessarily set it as far as like number of days per month or based on the, and maybe I'm misunderstanding the question too, but what you'd want to do is use like we did in scenario 4. So when we were in scenario 4, we used the fiscal period setup. And then when you're doing the proration equal per period, that will depend on whether or not that option's marked. And then we should look at the number of days in that period and adjust based on that. So if you're in a retail scenario or a 445 calendar scenario, you'd want to use that fiscal period option that we talked about in scenario 4. Let's see here. I did that one. Can you set up some deferral schedules to be set up to have equal amounts per period and some deferrals have different amounts per period based on the, let's see more, number of days in that period? Or is that parameter universal for all deferral schedules? So the parameter is universal, but it's a default. So when you go in the transaction deferral window on each line, whether it's a sales line, whether you're deferring a general journal line or AP invoice line, whatever you're working with, that transaction deferral entry screen will have that option in there, and it will default based on what the parameter is. If you have that set as true or yes, it'll default to yes, but you can have a mix of yes and no between your transaction lines. So I could have a sales order line that has it as yes and a sales order line that has it as no, just based on the deferral. So it's something that you can toggle as far as each transaction on its own. So think of it as a deferral transaction. So your deferral transaction is an item transaction on a sales order is one. An item transaction on that same sales order is another one. So keep that kind of context to it. Another question, are you planning to use financial tags with subscription billing? Yes, we're working across our team to do so. I don't know when we're going to have that implemented, but it's on the list. So there's a roadmap, if you will, of the journals to go first. And then once we get through those journals, then there's other transactions that we have to go and update as well. So yes, there are plans to do so. As far as timeline, I don't have a timeline that I can share for that.
And I would probably add to this question that the current priority is to assure that financial tags work along where the financial dimensions would be included. And therefore, because subscription billing does have financial dimension, it's part of the same roadmap. But as Brian mentioned, the timelines are not completely defined at this stage.
All right. So here we go. Let's see. Just did the financial tags. The next one. What happens if at the moment of changing the revenue recognition module for the subscription billing, we have some open sales order pending to create the revenue recognition journal? So if you have ones that are pending to create the revenue recognition journal, so I'm reading this as to do the recognition, then you would use the stubbing function that we talked about in the video. So that first demo. If you're talking about, I created the sales order, I turned off revenue recognition and it's sitting there, it's not invoiced yet, then what you would do is you'd use the deferrals option and then set up the deferral for that transaction. So that could all come in from defaulting information, or you can toggle it in there as far as setting it up as you go along. But depending on the situation, right? If you have something that you've already invoiced, then you have the deferral schedule there, then you could either stub it if it was recognized previously in revenue recognition. So you recognize it up to the date that you stop revenue recognition and then start recognizing it like we did here. In our example, we used 7/1 of 2023 to start revenue expense deferrals. And so the RevRec module and menus will be completely gone after updating to 10.0.38 or later. If we are using RevRec now, we must be migrated to subscription billing before upgrading to 10.0.38. Yes, that's the current plan. So originally it was going to be 10.0.36 due to some of the time frames as far as the product bundle going GA and 10.0.36 and the features for project integration with subscription billing. We pushed that back, so we're looking at the January release, which is 10.0.38. So it's not going to be a date-driven thing. So it's not going to be like January 1, it goes away regardless of what version you're in. It's going to be when you adopt 10.0.38 or later. So if you're on 37 and you skip 38, it would be when you pick up 39 or whatever release you pick up post 38. Then there's a question, what are the volume considerations mentioned earlier regarding Excel upload versus other methods? So when you're working with data management, I used Excel in our example here. Excel and data management might have some thresholds where you might need to break these things up into smaller chunks, right? So if I have millions of transactions, I might have to do it in multiple imports in order to get those deferral schedules in. So there's information on our websites as far as Excel and TMF that can explain what kind of considerations you might need to make there. Next question, the parameterization for subscription billing seems to be the same for accounts payable, deferred vendor invoices, as well as for receivables. Are there further restrictions when implementing both? So correct. As far as the parameters are the same as far as the revenue and expense deferrals parameters and the recurring contract billing parameters. The ones that are going to play into an AP scenario or an accounts payable scenario are going to be the recurring contract or the revenue expense deferrals parameters. Those ones, the parameters that you're going to see in there are going to be like equal per period, and then like the discount handling, which is specific to sales order anyway, and then the journals as far as the journal, and then do you want that to be automatically posted? So in terms of those are kind of the big things. You'll see more of the differences in the deferral defaults because that's where you're going to be able to say, what are the accounts I want to use in these scenarios? And those are in there by document. So you'll see them in there by sales order, invoice journal, purchase order invoice. You'll see a heading for each of those. And then you can have the ability to set a template for each of those, or you can set the default accounts for those too. So the parameters are kind of more generic, but the deferral defaults will be what you'll differentiate with there. I think that was the questions. I'll go through the list one more time to make sure I didn't miss one.
I think these were the whole questions as far as I was able
I just wanted to check to make sure I didn't miss any. So maybe one last call. Oh, look, there's one more that just came in here. So this one, anything we should be careful about when migrating data to subscription billing? I think the biggest thing is to be aware of the differences between how subscription billing works and how revenue recognition works. The biggest thing would be if you're using the entities, if you look at the demo that we did, the export from revenue recognition was in detail form, so it was line-based, where when we import the subscription billing deferral schedule, that's coming in a header base, and then we're letting the template blow that out or explode that out, or the start and end dates explode that out. So the biggest thing is be aware of the stubbing feature, because that thing's really handy as far as if you want all the detail. I guess the other things I would be careful about would be some of the other things that we talked about. So in the examples, and as Milda talked through some of the conventions as far as how they map to each other, just being aware of what's what and how those work. And I would say maybe one of the things that I would call out, just because it might not be super clear in the video, is let's say there's a small difference between the recognition amount that you saw in RevRec and what you see when you bring the deferral schedule in. What you could do there is maybe instead of bringing in the full amount, you could bring in the remaining amount of the deferral schedule. If you do that, then you can use modify schedule and explode that out. So for instance, maybe there are a few cents difference as far as the calculation for a couple months in some of those scenarios. You could use that to essentially get you where you want to go. So remember that once the deferral schedule's in there, if it's imported, you can delete it. So if you brought it in and it doesn't look right, or it didn't quite do what you wanted it to do, know that you can delete an imported one, fix it up, and re-import. They'll also know that we have the ability to, if you have the account number wrong, or maybe you put the account numbers in the reverse order, right? You instead of putting the deferral account, you put the recognition account there, or vice versa for the recognition account. You didn't have that right. You can use the adjust schedule option. So that one would be modify account. On the other scenarios, you'd use modify schedule, and then you can modify that schedule and kind of work off of that. So those would be the big things I'd say to be careful about or be aware of. Just knowing what those are, and also, check out the other tech talks that we've done. We talked through some of the other transaction scenarios, right? If you look at what